All right, Bill, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. All right, what we're going to talk about today is what's really happening in the current escrows that we're working on. Uh, Unfortunately, what some of this is happening that we have to have more awareness of, it can get us in some liability situations and also it can impact your commissions. Everything we talk about today when we're talking about property issues and especially repairs. The repair situation has definitely escalated in the last 12 months and probably more so in the last six. So, it, a couple years ago or even a year ago, we really weren't impacted because properties were being sold as is. Sellers were not willing to do any type of repairs. So basically, the bottom line on it is it made it somewhat easier for both the buyer and seller agent because they didn't have to deal with these or have to renegotiate during escrow. So it created a whole different type of real estate market that we're currently working in when it comes to negotiations and trying to resolve issues. What we're going to talk about today is the most common ones that we're seeing and the common mistakes that are being made. So as we move forward, I'm just going to talk to you about the local market to start off, and then we're going to get into property sales issues and then also repairs. On the time on the market is increasing. Now that's it's generally increasing due to overpricing. But what I'm starting to see with the existing market is actually starting to have a better price point in some of the new construction, which is unusual. Usually it was flipped the other way, but we're starting to see some adjustments in those areas. The the overpricing issue is a huge issue at time of listing. So you have to work very hard at that. I do realize you want to take a listing and you're in a competitive market and working against other real estate agents. But uh, if you get it overpriced and there's no motivation to sell, it's going to turn into a very long experience that you will not enjoy. So be diligent in those areas, put all your paperwork in place, make sure you have your comps, make sure you have everything that you need to try to get the property priced correctly. Because when we do see properties that are priced correctly, there are selling when 7 to 10 days, sometimes even shorter, if they're priced at in an area where the current market supports it. New construction, the listings are increasing due to the excess inventory. And one of the things I'm going to talk to you about probably a couple times today, but most importantly, new construction is definitely in the MLS. At one time, we very seldom ever saw any properties in the MLS involving new construction. Now, some of these builders are putting 10, 15, 20 properties in the MLS, and they're also starting to report their solds, their price reductions, everything that has to do with it. So it is impacting the numbers that we're looking at on a monthly basis and also on a daily basis. So what I need you to do is in your current MLS, no matter where it's at, you need to be looking at the market numbers. And in the past, I haven't said too much about expired listings, but you need to start looking at expired listings. The expired listings is starting to also impact. The active listings continue to increase. That's also caused by new construction bringing in all their inventory into the market. And so that's starting to impact. The new construction environment is starting to feel some adjustments, and we know it because they're starting to pay commissions again in most cases, and then also they're creating incentives. I'm not seeing too much in the price reductions because they're doing buy downs, and so that's generally where they're going for those first 3 years as far as um, buying down the loan. Sometimes they're even doing it for a full impact time. Sold listing reports. you have to be careful with that. It actually, the market looks better over last year than what it is this year, because unfortunately the new construction is coming in and kind of impacting it, and it's kind of skewing the numbers. So I noticed that it's starting to be a big issue, especially in all the MLS services that we're currently working in. Somebody said, well, why is that the case in the central areas like Fresno, Bakersfield, and the Vice areas where a lot of new construction is taking place? And their inventory is starting to build, and so they're putting more into the MLS market. Fall through sales, it's a national problem. If you've been seeing any articles on it, and which I read a lot of real estate articles, and the problem with some of that is that it's sent out to the masses, and we do have the fall through issues, but nationally, they're claiming it's around 15%. It's picked up by Zillow and some of those. What you have to be aware of involving this type of situation, you have to stay close to your client. You have to have awareness of what's going on in your escrow on a day-to-day basis. This is not a market that you can take a property, sell it, and then forget it, and come back and collect your commission. I mean, none of us actually did that, but in some cases there were agents out there in the past that did those type of things. I don't feel that they're currently in the market because most of those properties would fall through. So when you get an acceptance on an offer, then basically you have to stay in contact with your client all the time. You have to start asking sometimes probing questions. And some of those questions is, to see if there's any issues developing during the escrow period. Sometimes I know it's hard for us to be asking probing questions, but we do need to do it. It is important for us to get a feel for how the market is moving. Price reductions are still increasing. Where I'm seeing the big numbers in the price reductions is higher end properties, and some of those are substantial. So the expectations are, some sellers are, unfortunately, they're too high. And with those expectations, they have a tendency to overprice their properties. And unfortunately, what happens is when they do list the property, and I hope we're not making the mistake when we're listing properties, because higher end properties they're unique in themselves. Some of them are custom homes where the seller feels that the value is higher than really what it is, because of what they put into the property. And then there's no justification for the price point. When that happens, then you have to start doing price reductions. And when you start doing price reductions, you have to be understanding of what you're dealing with. If you're dealing with an $800,000 property, you do a price reduction and the market supports a $20,000 price reduction, you need to reduce it 20,000. You have to go out, do a new CMA based on the contingency sales also, and the sold. The sold is going to become more important, because what we're seeing is on the contingency sale, when they close out, they're coming in less than what it was showing when it went pending. So that can be deceiving, and you got to be extremely careful with that. You have to stay with your closings, your numbers that have closed on you, because if you don't, then you're going to get into this battle of trying to get the property price correctly, and then all of a sudden, sometimes the client they get frustrated with you. Then they start wanting to cancel the listing because they don't feel that you're doing a good job. And so just be careful with it. These are just sales issues that you're dealing with. Stay close to your current MLS. And Rapatoni has a good program to get market data, and also the current one is in TCMLS. So for Bakersfield is also a Rapatoni systems, which is very good. Hanford is also, and then of course Porterville is part of the TCI environment. The property sales issues. Let's talk about them. And why are we talking about them today? Because what we're experiencing as the properties, they're sometimes we're setting them up incorrectly. And then when we're trying to resolve the issues during escrow, then it starts developing into a problem. Can you move the screen on that property sales issues for me, please? What happens is the buyers are becoming they were more of I don't want to use the word, but they didn't have position in the escrow, and they had to pretty well accept whatever the seller indicated that they wanted for their property and what they were going to do. And in most cases, the seller was not going to do any repairs, and the buyers ended up buying properties. Part of that what happened is we would write a contract up, and it would be a no contingency situation or whatever it might be. So what we're running into now is buyers getting frustrated during the escrow, and we've already experienced them. They cancel the escrow. And we've got to be extremely careful with what's happening, because with the escrow cancellation, it creates a lot of problems, especially with people that in the process of moving or whatever it might be. Some of them are actually moving to another type of property. So why are they doing that? I've been checking with a couple agents, and they say, oh, well, they moved to another property because it was a better value. So you have to be extremely careful what's going on. When you put a property in escrow, you need to be aware of what's happening around you. Because if a person is working in a specific area of town, like the Northwest or Southwest or whatever it might be, they might see another property that's come on the market because the clients are more sophisticated than what they've ever been. And what they're doing is they're constantly looking in the MLS. And when they do that, they see something that comes on that might be better. They will think about canceling the escrow and moving to another property. You will have to be able to defend against that if you want to keep that escrow alive. So just make sure that you're constantly looking at what's going on in the current market. Purchasing new construction homes, basically this is an issue over seller concessions and the buy downs of the interest rates. A lot of these, the new constructions pretty well hold in their price points, and it's actually higher than our existing market in most cases. And that this is a reverse of what it was 12 months ago, because the used market was higher than the new construction. The new construction is having to maintain their higher price points because of the seller concessions, because they want to retain that profit margin they've had in the past. And they also weren't having to pay commissions in some cases, depended on the new construction builder. So make sure you're understanding what's going on in your geographical area when it comes to new construction. If it's in a northwest area and there's a lot of new construction going on, then you need to be aware of what's happening there, because the client could disappear on you during escrow and create an additional problem. The buyers are requesting seller concessions. This is becoming common. So I know the sellers, they have, in most cases, have a good profit margin. And I do realize that they don't want to come off of that, but you have to be able to explain it. Now, in the MLSs, depending on the agent, they will sometimes place in there what the seller concessions were. So if you're using a comp and it's got the information available to you, you need to be able to use that and explain it to the seller that, that they need to do concessions if they're going to match point with the property that recently sold. We're seeing seller concessions probably more widely instead of having repairs to the property. And I have to be careful with that scenario. It's sometimes the concessions they're requesting is much higher than what it would cost to do the repairs. So that's the problematic part of it. So a person has to understand that. I do realize that it's easier for the buyer and the listing agent to uh, get an agreement on that, not doing any repairs, but uh, it- we just have to have some awareness of it. It's not that we're going to provide recommendation on what the cost of repairs are, but we just need to know what it is. And if somebody requests in seller concessions, that everything has to be in writing. What I'm starting to see is agents are negotiating back and forth without paperwork. All negotiations are done between the seller and the buyer, so that it has to be on a format that has a form that's tied to that, and then the buyer or the seller is the person that's doing the request, not you. Loan issues. Loan issues, we're having some issues with underwriting the approval. In other words, the it's getting delayed. The escrow is getting delayed. We need to understand what's going on with that. So if a person talks to you about it and says, "Okay, I'm trying to get it through underwriting," you need to know what's causing that. So when you're dealing with that underwriting approval issue, make sure you're addressing it immediately because it's usually tied closer to the close of escrow timeline. You need to know what it is if there is one. So that means you need to talk to the loan officer. We're going to have to talk to loan officers a much we're going to have to talk to them more often than we ever have in the past. And my recommendation is probably on a weekly basis, reach out to them, ask them, if there's anything that the buyer needs to bring in. And so that they have all the documentation in front of them as soon as possible. So we don't have the delays on the underwriting approval. And it's usually a telltale sign on the underwriting approval that there may be a problem. So, and that's what we're going to talk about next. And it's called the delayed appraisal, buyer or lender not ordering. That is a red flag. If you see that, and that's what you should be doing because your contract has a timeline when that appraisal should be ordered and it should be done in a timely manner. My recommendation, the loan application is in, they have pre-approval letter already in your hand, then the appraisals should be ordered almost, within the first 5 days for sure. If for some reason they're not being ordered, and which we've seen a little of it because of delays, has hit historically tied to maybe the client is on a borderline situation, the interest rate movement, the loan is not locked in. There's a lot of different things that could cause that. So basically, you need to talk to the loan officer and ask them if the appraisal's been ordered. And I wouldn't wait for somebody to call you. I would call within the first 5 days and say, has the appraisal been ordered and has the funds been put up for the appraisal? If it's a cash transaction, that's a totally different arena. But basically, now we're dealing with a lot of our buyers are FHA, lower down payment situations as far as people purchasing properties. Seller issues during escrow.
Oh, hey, Bill,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you. I was just looked at your list. Are you guys experiencing any issues with like insurance and getting policies set in place for the buyers?
No, it depends on where you're at. If you're up in the mountain areas, yes. The answer to your question is yes. So, but geographically within the cities, we're not seeing it. And what they are using is zip codes. So here's where the problem starts developing. If the zip code flips over into a mountainous area, it could create a problem because some lenders are just strictly using the zip code for whether the housing is partially in a mountainous area and out, and that's becoming a huge problem. So yes, it can be an issue. My recommendation, and I'm glad you brought it up, the buyer needs to be immediately getting in contact with their whoever's going to place the loan on that property so that can try to resolve it. Because if it turns out to be a fair program where they have to get a very expensive, unfortunately, get very expensive insurance, it's going to be problematic. Flood zone issues are also another issue. And right now, temporarily, my understanding is that they're not doing flood zone under FEMA, and it would have to be private if you got that type of situation going on. But those are resolvable. There's quite a few private companies out there currently still doing it.
Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
Love to pick your brain. Thank you.
You're welcome. Seller issues during escrow. The big thing is, we're overpricing property. And the longer timeline on the market, it starts working against the property. It gets shop worn, I guess is one term it could be used or whatever. So if you know you have a property that's overpriced and at the time of listing, you weren't able to resolve that issue, you're going to have to start resolving it within probably 7 to 10 days. I mean, you need to start working with the client to try to get that taken care of. I know it's going to be problems, but here's how you handle your client on an overpriced property. And let's say they're not getting any showings, nothing's going on. Basically, you have to understand the motivation of the seller. This is your you should understand it at time of listing, but sometimes we don't. I mean, I sold for many years. Sometimes, the seller is pretty reserved about giving you information, but you got to get the motivation down. So if they're moving geographically to another location, the price reductions is probably not going to be a problem. Estates, where we're dealing with estates, sometimes they can be problematic if we're dealing with multiple people that are trustees of the estate. That one, it can drag out because there's no consensus on what the sales price should be. So be careful with that one. When you're dealing with that, it's hard. And I'll be honest with you, you need to start becoming aggressive with it when you're not getting activity that as far as showing the property and dealing with it. These type of clients, sometimes they want you to do open houses every weekend, and you already know your property's overpriced, but the bottom, what you need to do is there's a couple ways of dealing with an overpriced property. One of the things is, if the property is at the top of the market and there's other properties, then take a look at your marketing, see if you can improve that, maybe a staging situation, aerial photos, some of those type of things that you got to bring the customer to look at the property a little closer. So otherwise, the overpricing is just not going to get you anywhere because you're looking for a few clients that will pay more, and those are usually tied to a unique piece of property, something that's got something special going for it that will allow that. Otherwise, if it's just what we normally deal with in the real estate market, it's not going to work and it's not going to sell. It's repairs not completed. Property is more marketable, when it's completed. Now the repairs whenever possible, if we can encourage the client to get the property in a marketable condition prior to the listing, it's much stronger. And you can list the property in advance of when it's being placed on the market. Just follow the MLS rules when you're doing that. Now, the repairs, when they're not completed, and then you get photos taken on it, and then it becomes very obvious of what the problems are, it's not going to be it's not going to be a good situation. So try to get those done in advance. Basic things that can be done on a vacant piece of property, for example, if there's interior painting needs to be done, in most cases it does, it needs to be completed. If carpeting needs to be replaced and the house needs to be freshened up, it needs to be completed. Us agents in the business, providing a carpet allowance for something that's really bad, the value of the property goes down substantially without even doing that. So if the customer can do the repairs, then they need to be done. And unfortunately, if they can't, then it's going to have to be a credit. But I will tell you, the value of that property is going to go down. In other words, when you go to list the piece of property, you have to take consideration. It's going to have to be lower because we're in a very competitive real estate market as inventory continues to increase. Reduce pricing. We don't want you chasing the market with small price reductions. If you have a $500,000 house, it's not moving, nothing's going on, it's been on the market for a couple weeks, and you're not getting any activity, you're overpriced in most cases because the market just didn't die overnight, at least we hope not. And the bottom line on it is you need to do price reductions. If you're dealing with a $500,000 house, and this is just an example, you need 10, 15, depends on how far it's off, 20,000. If you look in the MLS, you don't want to do what every other agent does. Oh, price reduction, 1,000. I saw one here the other day, $1. 1,000, 5,000. 5,000 is the most common. I wouldn't be doing that. I would be doing something that is off of what everybody else is doing. So if you're dealing with a $350,000 house, it's 10,000 off. It needs to be reduced 10,000. Don't be the agent that recommends the $5,000. Sit down with the client, do the CMA, justify what you're explaining, and get the price based on that. So then you're going to be in the right, you're going to be on track. Otherwise, you're going to start chasing the market. I've watched agents and I've seen the market here, and they're reducing it every $5,000 every other week. Well, the competing properties that are coming on the market is less than what there are, and so they're always chasing it and they're never getting an acceptance. So you have to watch what's happening with the market. Somebody said, well, why, new listings coming on, if they're coming on underneath what your property is, you're just ending up being a bump point. In other words, they might come out and show your property, but they're just going to use it to go sell their property. So just make sure that you have a total awareness when you're starting to do that. Property fall throughs, back on the market. If it's back on the market because of a low appraisal, then put it at the appraised valuation. Don't put it back on the market for full value and you have an appraised valuation of less, because it's not going to go well. And if it's an FHA, you have to use the FHA appraisal anyway. So get it based on whatever that is. Fall throughs for no specific reason, sometimes that's not an impact. But if it's a fall through based on repair issues, then that is an issue. So when you see that you may possibly have a fall through, you use it to your advantage to explain to the customer, hey, this is what the other agent was telling me, the reason why it's falling through. Sometimes we don't have any reasons, But if it's based on repair issues, we need to get the repairs or we need to reduce the price accordingly. Don't put the property back on the market if you had a property that was listed for 500 and it went for 490 and it went pending at 490. Don't put it back on for 500. Put it back on for 490 because we're not in a market that's going up in value. We're in a market that's pretty well stabilized, is just kind of running its course, but it's also starting to see if, in different price points some price reductions. Variable rate loans on new home purchases. Now, okay, if you're out working on a piece of property, if you went into a subdivision today that was built and closed escrow with the buyer, let's say 3 years ago, it was FHA. The buyer is probably in some cases behind on their loan. On the variable rate, because this is what builders were doing 3 years ago, and they still are in some cases, they did the buy down program. In other words, they had a graduated rate increase as far as the loan amount was. So they had a teaser loan payment for the first year, then it increased the second, and then increased the third. So what we're starting to see is some of these properties are going delinquent. Now, if you have one of these listings, then you can reach out to myself or one of the managers and I'll walk you through a short sale and we'll talk to you about how to be able to sell that property, because that will require a short sale because there's no equity in the property, and doing a short sale, we can get your commissions out of it. So don't be afraid of them. Just remember, if you're working in a subdivision that goes back 3 years, some of those properties might have had those type of loans. So it's about awareness. Everything we're talking to you about today is strictly about awareness. Commissions. Now, the buyer's representation, the broker's compensation agreement. The lender is now requesting a copy to verify commissions buyer required to pay. This is not a problem. I have people calling and have agents calling in and saying, well, do I provide that? Yes. What the lender is doing is also title is asking for it. In some cases, depends. So here's what you do with that. If you put 3% on that form, that lender and the listing agent is agreed to pay 2.5%, that not the agent, but the firm, I mean the seller, then you're going to have to change your form to 2.5% and send it over to them. I do realize with the form, there's a reference in there that it's not going to be any higher than what the seller is willing to pay, but I'm running into trouble with that one with the lender and also with the title company. So make your life simple. Just complete a new form, have them sign it and send it over, because it just has to do with their requirements they have for making the loan. Seller asking agent to reduce commissions during escrow. Stay away from it if you can. Protect your value. If they're just doing it just to be doing it and there's nothing else that's impacting the transaction, and that would be repair issues or something else that was going on, seller concessions, don't have enough money to close escrow and all that kind of thing, that's a different scenario. But in most cases, it's seller just saying, hey, I want the commissions reduced. Just stay with your agreed upon commission and move forward with it. That's generally involves investors. If you have a seller that's an investor, they have a tendency to be a little bit more aggressive in that area than just John Q. Public. So I wouldn't be too concerned about it, but always protect your value. Okay, let's move to the next page. Repair issues. What I have here today is some standard forms that involve repairs or different things that take place. Now, we're going to provide some training on these forms and they're going to go in detail on them. Today, I'm just doing a cursory and talking to you about why we need to use the forms. And I do strongly recommend you, if you do not have 100% understanding on how these forms work, that you attend the training when it's provided by the company. But I'm going to talk to you briefly. What we're seeing is the forms are not being used, a lot of oral communication going on, and it's creating problems. So we have to get by this. We have to stay with the forms. If you stay with the forms, that's what the buyer or the seller is asking people to do. Now, the buyer investigation election, my recommendation, you do it at the time of the offer. Have your buyer determine what type of things that they want done. It is for the buyer's information. Explain to the buyer what they're wanting to have done. If that's what they want done, they would have to pay those costs. Otherwise, under that buyer's investigation election form, if they want the seller to take care of it, then we need to have it with the offer. All of that needs to take place when you originally start negotiating. And then also, it protects you as an agent. I ran into a couple of incidents where, oh, well, nobody told me this. Oh, yeah, I wanted this. I didn't want that. The form stops it. It just lays it out. The request for repair, the RR form. Please try to get all of the repairs requests done at the same time. Trying to do several of these forms, it gets confusing and it becomes people get totally off track with it. I realize within the form there's some things you can do with it to do multiple forms, but try to keep your life simple. The simplest way to keep your life simple is just find out what all the repairs are going to be and send one form. And of course, stay within your timelines. And my recommendation to you, don't reduce down past 17 days. So send that form over, have the client sign it. It's not about you calling and saying you want things done. Use the form. Agents don't, on the seller side, sometimes they get combative when you're orally communicating issues with them. Let the form do the communication. The seller's response and the buyer's reply to the request for repairs, use the form. If you don't know how to complete it correctly, then you have to reach out to one of the managers or myself, and we'll walk you through it to make sure it's completed correctly. But these are becoming very important. So when these are not completed correctly, then it creates a legal problem. All of the things that I'm talking to you about here can lead to a legal problem. And so in most lawsuits, legal actions that's ever happened within our company has always evolved around repair issues. There's a few exceptions, but in most cases, that's what it is. The addendum. Use the addendum correctly. Now, the seller's response and the request for repairs, they don't go to the title company. If there is a concession that's been agreed to, then you have to complete the addendum, the seller's concession amount to the title company and the lender. So, but you use the addendum. You don't use those two other forms. Those are internally trying to resolve the issue, trying to figure out how we're going to make things work. And if on the form there is a concession coming forward, then you use that form. Use that form, send it over to them. There's another way of doing it, but I'm trying to keep it simple today. Request for reports. That is a form, it's pretty basic, but if you have any repairs done, you should have receipts. There is an exception to it. A seller can do some repairs, but they have to write it out and provide a copy with it. Then use that form to send over to the buyer side. Then nobody can claim that they didn't receive something. They have to acknowledge that they received all the reports. I do realize some people send their reports to the title company, and title company has people sign them, this and that. That's okay, whatever that might be. But as far as doing it correctly, the bottom line on it is it's here. You do the receipt for reports. Just sending off over random reports and you have no documentation to support that they were received, it's going to be very problematic. That all of these things that I'm talking to you about here is very easy to do as long as you follow the guidelines. If you follow the guidelines, you're going to be in good shape. Verification of property condition. Verification of property condition needs to be done generally 5 days prior to close of escrow. On the form, if there's something that has not been completed, then you need to write on the form what needs to be done, and then you send the request for repair back. So on the verification of condition, if there's something not taken care of, then you send that along with the request for repair. Just calling out, sending the verification of property condition is not, that's just not 100% correct. I need you to follow all of those guidelines. Like I said, we're going to provide more detailed training on that. So it's just the type of market we're in. Buyer and seller issues. Buyer and seller issues involving repairs. Short escrow, not providing time to resolve repairs. There's no reason to be doing anything less than 30 days, 45 days. If you see you got an older piece of property, then my recommendation is do it. I was working with an agent the other day and he had a timeline that was just really short. And I told him, I says, these timelines are really short. Well, we can get it done or we'll give an extension. Well, you're not the seller of the property, so how do you know that? So you got to be careful with it. So I would keep your escrow stay with the normal that's currently there, and then you can solve these issues because it's hard to get repair people in, especially during winter months involving roof issues. Seller not extending escrow and the repairs are not completed. That's always going to be a problem. So that tells you really got a problem seller because they're the ones that were supposed to complete it and they're not extending escrow, so it's a big issue. That's a red flag issue. Buyers requesting seller concessions for repairs. That's becoming real common. I'd be surprised if you don't see that in your escrows as we're moving forward. So just be prepared for it. I mean, when you're dealing with repair issues, then sometimes you're negotiating the sales price. Sometimes you're dealing with seller concessions. So it's just another form of negotiation. Buyers requesting additional repairs after 17 days. In other words, the contingency form was not used. The contingency form needs to be used. At the end of 17 days, you get rid of the contingencies because we're seeing buyers come back even when a contingency form is done and asking for something additional. So use the form. That's your client's safe to try to get it out. Even though something may happen after 17 days, it has to be addressed. That's a different issue but we need to follow the contract. The buyer completing repairs prior to closing of escrow. We don't want buyers doing repair work. It's problematic in general. And, I mean, the buyer could be hurt on the property. The repairs could be escrow falls through. And then we got buyer's costs tied in there. And so it has a tendency to be very problematic. So historically, we don't want any buyers doing any repair work prior to close of escrow. They can do what they want after close. Uh, they uh, they can do those type of repairs and do it with a seller concession based on what the cost of the repairs might be. So it's going to have to be addressed, but we're going to have to stay away from it. Repair work not completed by licensed contractor. We're going to talk about that a little later. But make sure you're using somebody that's qualified to do the work. There is an exception. There's a lower dollar amount for people not having a licensed contractor. But in most cases, we're going to stay with them. Property flips, you got to do the paperwork involving repairs and permits. This is a huge liability for a real estate company. It's a liability for you as an agent. It's liability for the seller. People that are doing flips are not that they historically have never done it. Flips have been going on for probably 30, 40 years and never had to provide well, they should have been providing on the TDS, but in most cases they didn't. So from now on, make sure it's done. Ask the question, is this a property flip? And then they provide the paperwork. And then I want you to use the form that we discussed up there with the receipt for reports. Use that form and send them specifically to them. And then you're okay. So the home inspection. Now, what we're going to talk about today, we're not going to be talking about everything that goes on in a home inspection because 50, 60, 70 pages, my gosh, some of them are just crazy. I don't want you using the handwritten one, the guy that's been back in the 40 years ago doing a home inspection. I want you to use somebody that's qualified. I want you to use somebody that has the ability to take pictures and photos and because so everybody can see. But it's strictly up to the buyer, how much cost they want to pay for that type of work. But their home inspection should have pictures. Health and safety issues need to be addressed. So what is the most common things we're going to see? Electrical, plates are missing, plugs are not grounded correctly, something like that. That's a health and safety issue. Plumbing, there are leaks under the sink, could be a mildew, it could be who knows what it could be. Those are common. Air conditioning is not working properly. Those things are health and safety. If they're not working at all, it's definitely a huge problem. It has to do with the appraiser is going to get after it, number one, and so it's going to become very problematic. So those type of things, you got to take a look at the report. You as an individual take a look from an agent standpoint, take a look at these things. Take a look, say, oh, okay, we got some of these things. And also in the report, they usually talk about the issues in the front part of it that the most things that are most common. Pools, not maintained or pool equipment issue at close of escrow. What I need you to do is reinforce with the client that the pool needs to be in good condition at close. Now, if somebody's buying a property and the pool is green and it's not being maintained properly, it needs to be addressed day one. If you're the listing agent, it needs to be addressed day one. In other words, at the time of listing, that pool should be in good condition. And if it's not, it needs to be denoted and what is not working and what is working. So the pool, if it's a vacant piece of property, the problem we run into with it is the pool sweeps. So just make sure that everything is being maintained and we don't end up losing the pool sweep or whatever it is. Work that out with the pool company or the seller. But at close of escrow, that pool equipment, that it should be, if if you handle your pool correctly as a listing agent, it should be sparkling clean. And at close of escrow, it should be the same. If it's not, you're going to end up having to do a request for repair and find out what's wrong. It could be it just simply wasn't maintained. And another thing that we have to remember always, no power shut off to the property prior to close of escrow. So that can always be an issue. They shut things down or something's not running correctly. I would probably recommend if there's a pool company currently taking care of the pool equipment, then it shouldn't be an issue. If you're an agent, uh, the home inspection might take a look at it, but if they don't, and the pool is not looking too good, you might want to have a pool company come out and take a look at it and do a request for repair if that issue needs to be taken care of. Roofs. This is going to be your biggest issue. We're getting into the winter months and the biggest issue for lawsuits. So if you don't remember anything else today, roof repairs, my recommendation going into winter months, have your buyer do a roof inspection. The home inspection is not the guy for roofs, but they sometimes do it and they do denote tiles and things missing. But a roof inspection going into winter months it can be important if your client, especially you get a big rain and all of a sudden you got a leak in the house, it's going to be a huge problem. When I had my company, I had 4 lawsuits involving roofing contractors. So most of my legal actions when I owned my company involved roofs. So you got to be careful during the winter months. It's always an issue. So if you do a roof certification for 3 years, it takes the liability off your shoulders. Termite repairs. It has to be completed by a licensed provider. Termite companies, they sometimes provide estimates and bids for work that's other than spray work. So they're licensed to do that. So that's not, or they have an outside sourcer that goes in and does it. And usually that's dry rot issues on the eaves and in and around about the property. So make sure that you never sign one of those termite forms. They request for repairs, work to be done, or anything like that on that termite report. Have the client sign it. It's not generally an issue if you ordered it, if it's in the contract. Otherwise, that's the extent that you would go through. Agent involved in recommendations involving repairs. Here's what it is. Always use the proper forms. No oral agreements. So you're a facilitator of basically forms. You facilitate forms back and forth. You communicate with your client. You don't communicate with the other real estate agent. You can get some basic information from them, but you got to be careful when you're communicating with the agent on the other side because they might start posturing on you. It's easier to just use the forms. Just send the forms over. Keep your life simple because if you get an arrogant real estate agent, unfortunately, there's a few in the industry, they just start posturing on you and just get out of control. So if you just use the paperwork and it's signed by your client, then you don't have to worry about it. So you don't get into all of that discussion. The other thing that you got to be careful with if you're recommending a contractor, verify that they have a license. If you're recommending somebody, just you can do a verification check very easy, or just ask for a copy of their business card or whatever it has, something that has a license on it. If it doesn't have a license on it, then it's a problem. Providing recommendations, you provide two names. So in other words, never provide one, provide two. Our company a couple 3 years ago had a huge lawsuit involving a well company, and we only provided one recommendation. And then before it was over with, we lost the suit. You have to provide two recommendations. So because the well company that was recommended by our company, they went out of business. So you can imagine when the well went bad, it was very, very ugly. Signing for repairs. Owner to sign all contracts. You as an agent, we don't want you ever signing any contracts. Because if you do, then you become liable. So send the information, a copy of the contract. Somebody calls you up and said, yeah, we can do that work for $1,200. Ask them to send the contract. We'll forward it on to the seller. So that's where that all sits. So you never sign anything, and all repairs need to be in writing. So if somebody says, oh, I'll do that for $600, that's fine. Tell them to send it to you. And then you'll forward it on to the client. Now, if the homeowner does it on their own, that's their issues. Does not involve you individually. But if it involves you or you're involved with it, then that's what we need. Repairs on property is not to be completed by the agent. So I do realize some of you have some workman abilities and probably have done, can do things, but no, we don't want it. This has to do with the liabilities. And paying for the repairs, the seller to pay for repairs and not the agent. So somebody said, well, sometimes there's just not enough money in the escrow or whatever it is. It's going to be case by case. The agent, here's what it is. The seller has no money. You're trying to close the escrow, and you can't close the escrow unless the agent kicks in a few bucks on both sides. That happens. We're going to run into it as we get on down the road. But in this type of market, it should not be a problem because the equity in these properties are substantial. And so the seller should be paying for the repairs. At some point, we may end up having to deal with that. And sometimes we get people that start posturing on both sides, and the agents to get the escrow to close may contribute. But that's case by case, and then that they need to discuss that with their managers. So see if there's an alternative to it to resolve the issues. Do appreciate everybody coming on today. And of course, anytime you need any assistance or help, we're here for you. And just reach out to your contracts or, your managers or ourselves, and we'll be more than happy to help you. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Bill.